Hey, welcome. Pull up a chair, have a seat. Let's go ahead and get into some Bleed Bow Gladiator with a bit of a focus on solo self found. Now, I had made a video of this a little while ago, just about a day or two ago, and got a little bit of critique back, and I realized something. I had made some pretty serious mistakes, and I thought the mistakes were bad enough to warrant actually recreating this video and to try to get a little bit more focused on what I'm trying to purvey here. I don't want to uh, pretend that you're going to be able to build the kind of build that I had over the last few weeks. So the first thing I want to do is kind of apologize to anybody who had watched that video, and hopefully this one will be a lot smoother and more focused. So I'm going to first start off with essentially some generic tips. Now, these tips aren't necessarily just for this build. These tips can be used across the board. Hell, it could be used for solo self-found, hardcore, softcore, trade, doesn't matter. These are just generic tips that are kind of to make up for some of the things that I might have misinterpreted or misrepresented. That's probably the better word. So, first off, generic leveling tips. So, one of the things you're going to always have to pay attention to, especially when you're doing specific builds that might require you to use mostly strength gems, or you're part of the tree, like here, we're the duelist, where we have a lot of access to dexterity and strength, but not a lot of intelligence. So it's difficult for us to make up for that. Make sure you're paying attention to the stats that you pick up on items. If you pick up an item that's going to make up for something like that, do so. Also, don't be afraid of using the large nodes. In this build, very early on, we'll have access to a couple of large nodes. These happen to be Dex and Int. Both of these are things that you're going to be focusing on because they are kind of starved early on, and it'll take a little while to make up for. Int will be the one that's always starved for, and you're going to have to work on that. Dex, a little easier to make up for, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You want to focus on things like resists. Resists are a really good way of not dying multiple times and having to bash your head against the boss on your way up to getting to maps. A good example is the very first major boss that we fight, which is Merveil. She's at the end of Act 1, and she's all cold damage. So you can get a couple of sapphire rings, pay attention to the ground drops, and also you can purchase a couple of sapphire rings from the vendor in town, and you won't have any issues with the damage taken from Merveil. Um, the one thing, though, to understand is that elemental resist is different from chaos resist. Chaos resist is, even though it is a resist, it is a more of a premium stat. You're not going to see a lot of that on early game. You're not going to even worry about chaos resistance until you start getting into mapping and mid-level gearing, and then you can focus on trying to get your chaos resist up. Uh, Adjust yourself according to the drops that you find. Sometimes you may find something that's got really good stats, but only has a socket on it. Or you might find something with 4 links or 5 links, but it has no stats on it. Understand that that's going to happen and you need to adjust for it. If you get a white item that has 5 links, put a transmute on it. Do whatever it takes to get some stats on it, and then craft anything you can. Crafting is your friend, and you should never be afraid of using it. Now, in this case, this build here, 2 stats that are going to be the more difficult ones to worry about are intelligence and dexterity. Now, later on in the build, we will be getting a lot more dexterity nodes. In fact, this section right here, where we come down and get some physical damage nodes, we will be replacing this once we're able to get to the end game, and we'll actually come around here and take these instead. We'll end up taking about 30 points, and there's another 20 here. So here's 50 dexterity you'll be able to make up right away, and you'll be taking these points out as well as some of this, because you'll be coming down in a different direction, because you're going to be coming over here and doing a couple other things. So the spec is a little bit different, so we'll get there eventually. Dexterity, int, again, You can get that stuff in these large nodes. There's two here, and we will be pathing here very soon, very early on in the build. So you have access to a couple that aren't too far away. So understand that you have access to quite a bit of those stats while you're leveling and early mapping until you get some stuff crafted. While you're leveling, another thing to really look out for, and kind of piggybacking off the idea of sockets and crafting, is don't be afraid. Craft when you can. When you got a low amount of a certain resist and you want to make up for it, check your gear. See if you can put anything on it. Remember, magic items could have two modifiers on it. If your item that you're wearing in your belt slot only has one modifier and it happens to be, prefix, then go ahead and craft a suffix on it. You can tell by holding Alt and scrolling over an item, it'll tell you if it's a prefix or a suffix. All resistances, elemental, chaos, and all stats, strength, int, and dexterity, those are all suffixes, so understand that as long as you have an open suffix on something, you can craft that on. Again, magic is only two modifiers. However, if you have a rare item on, it's three modifiers per explicit, so that means three prefixes, three suffixes, a total of six explicits on that item. Essences. Essences are something that you'll see early on in the game. Don't be afraid of killing them. Get as many essences as possible. They're great boons for trying to craft early gear. You pick up that white item I was talking about earlier that has all the sockets you need. Oh, look at this. I actually have an essence that gives me, 15 intelligence. Slap it on. Get yourself a rare item with some of the stats that you're already needing guaranteed. They're great, great items, and they're really good for early mapping as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we get into the meat and potatoes is that one of the reasons that I'm remaking this video is I got kind of sidetracked and too focused on the final build. This is where I'm going to tell you that my final build was kind of ridiculous. I got really lucky. I got an Adorn with high percentage. I got an unnatural instinct. I had quite a bit of fun gear to really play around with. Storm Shroud. I got myself ailment immune. I got spell suppression cap really early. I was doing really good damage. This is a kind of a strange build where your damage depends on if something is moving or not, because and I'll go over it later, but we don't take Crimson Dance in this build. So you do a specific amount of damage, and then if they move, they take quite a bit more. The total amount of damage my original build did was around 12 million damage while moving, which wasn't bad. It was clearing 17s. But again, the reason that I'm just real briefly mentioning it here is that I will not be touching on that whatsoever in this guide. You can go check out my other videos of me just kind of goofing off, having a couple funny clips and a couple of, cool drops or, interesting things that I decided to put into those videos. And you can go see what the build ended up turning into because I put the POB over there. So why not we go ahead and move on and get started. All right. So, first things first. Let's go ahead and talk about the very beginning of the leveling process. In the item section, did not put any gear here because there's no reason to. Again, we're solo self-found. Use what you get. If you find something that is better than what I had mentioned here in these two spots, great. These are what I'm basically just highlighting for early leveling, and then even in mid leveling, it's the same thing. Just look for bows that have fizz damage, flat, or percentage. And if you can, get the attack speed. It's not necessary, but it's a good little help for early leveling. You won't be able to see the attacks can cause bleeding chance until later on. But once you start seeing those bows, those are also huge for your build because eventually we're going to want to craft a bow that has a tier 1 version of that modifier. That supplements are a chance to bleed and allows us to move around our gems because eventually the gems in this build, as we go over here to skills, this chance to bleed is not something you want to keep on here for a long period of time. It's got a little bit of extra damage on top of it, but the main reason for this is that it supports attacks cause bleeding. Eventually, we want to get rid of this thing. So same with chance or the split arrow. This is the skill you can get right away. One thing I wanted to mention is that you can get split arrow and puncture real early on. If you don't want to use those, or if you don't get a good enough bow, or you're not feeling comfortable enough because you're not hitting enough, or you're not bleeding enough, and it's starting to get annoying, feel free to use things like shattering steel. Those steel skills are very good. Make sure you have a decent sword or axe, one-hander, and just run around and do that. They're not they're a good supplement for the main skill for early on. However, split arrow is purchased right when you get to the first town, and puncture, I believe, is only a few levels after that. Once you have access to those, make sure you're throwing them into something to start leveling them. Again, you can throw weapons into your offhand, aka when you hit X, you'll switch to a secondary set of weapons. You can put it on there, level the gems up there so that you have them ready to go once you have a decent enough bow. The things that I want to highlight here for leveling, uh, mainly here, you want to make sure that you come down and you get this Golem's Blood. It's the closest life nodes wheel to the start here because you want to take skills cost life instead of 30% of mana cost. It's going to help supplement the fact that this build will eventually get mana starved, and you want to make up for it as best as possible. Get this node right away. You shouldn't have much problems with the damage that you're taking early on, as long as you don't have too many sockets. You don't want to throw on a tabula. Again, you shouldn't have one anyway. This is a league start build. But if you were to level this as a secondary character or something, understand you're going to have to deal with this. But of course, leveling it as a secondary character, you're going to have a lot more benefit of other pieces of gear. Another thing we want to make sure that we get is this wheel right here. You want to take this wheel because we are trying to get to 100% attacks cause chance to cause bleeding. Once we are at 100%, we can start moving these nodes around a little bit, tweaking the build, etc. Here we have bloodletting, just more bleeding over time, more attack damage to bleeding enemies. And then here you want to increase the bleeding duration. Increased bleeding duration will create more damage. However, later on, we'll also be getting faster bleeds, which will just compound the amount of damage that you're doing. So you'll have way more damage over time, but then you'll shrink it down so that the damage is faster. That's kind of how that scales. That's kind of how that works. But the main goal, and this is the primary goal, and this is where this kind of ends, this preliminary initial push, is you want to get Resolute Technique. This will make things feel infinitely better. Why? You're going to always hit, and you don't care about critting. This is not a crit build whatsoever. You don't care about that. So once you get Resolute Technique, everything will feel so much smoother. Again, if it's not working out for you, feel free to use one of the other skills like the Lancing Steel. However, from leveling just recently, this is what I did, and it felt fine. I was making sure that I was paying attention to all bow drops and putting on whatever gave me the most physical damage. Early on in the leveling, it's okay to have some elemental or some other types of damage in your build because you're not using brutality. So there's nothing that's stopping you from also getting benefits from elemental damage as well. It's just not the focus of the build, and eventually you're not going to want that. Other than that, I believe this is really all that's needed for the initial push. Again, this will get you around Act 3-ish. And then the next portion, which will be the next section, will be more focused on kind of tweaking the build, getting a few more nodes that give more damage, and fleshing it out a little better before we get to the final section. So let's go ahead and move on to the secondary threshold. Okay, secondary threshold. Now, this one's going to be a little bit more open for where you can go, what you can do, but I'm going to try to point out some stuff that I highly suggest that'll help your leveling to be a lot smoother. Again, at the top of this video, I did mention things like clarity and purity of elements. I still highly suggest clarity at minimum because it will help you supplement the amount of mana this build will drain from you. Early on, it's not as bad. Later on, once we put in a mana forge setup and what have you, you will drain mana pretty quickly. So clarity is not bad to have, and I think that's a pretty decent skill to have for most builds when you're leveling. So same with purity of elements if you want to just make up for that, and also just make you elemental ailment immune. Again, I already showed you these. Again, you're just going to focus on trying to find bows with as high fizz damage as possible. Eventually, you're going to move into bows that have the bleeding chance and bleeding damage modifier, which are suffixes. And you're going to want fizz damage quivers as well and damage over time. Damage over time can be crafted on your bows. However, your quivers have to roll the damage over time modifier. Later on, you're going to focus on something else. I'll get to that later, but we'll go into the skills real quick. Again, same thing. This is going to flesh it out a little bit better. Snipe is kind of hard to put into the build early on until you have the dexterity requirement to get it in. It's also kind of unnecessary because right now I have it set in a 5th socket. You're probably not going to see that right away, but if you do, there you go. That's what I would consider one of the better versions. Once you have your chance to bleed at 100%, you no longer need this chance to bleed. Again, you need the modifier on the bow. That'll make up for that percentage, as well as your skill tree, and we'll get to that here in a second. War Banner, one thing I forgot to mention, and I apologize. War Banner is something you want to look at as soon as you can get it. Get War Banner in the initial setup, the primary. I will put a highlight of that somewhere in that first section so that I can kind of point out, oops, I missed this. Yes, get War Banner. Don't hesitate to take clarity if it helps you out. And Herald of Purity. Herald of Purity is a bit of a defensive layer on top of the fact that it's a really good offensive layer. Get that at the in Act 2 and roll with that. I actually ended up rolling with that all the way to the end game. So I never was able to get to Pride because of the way I had things set up. But again, Pride is going to be your better bet. We'll get to that later. As for the tree, this is where you're going to start looking for certain things. Oops. Let's go ahead and clear that. We got a couple things that are helpful for your damage being taken from your life. This wheel will help mitigate that, as well as this wheel. This will also let you pick up some more life masteries. This here, Vanquisher, this is a great wheel. Tons of physical damage. You want to take the physical mastery, 10% more maximum physical damage. This is a great wheel. And again, we're also close to these 2 nodes if you need to get your dex or your intellect up. Down here, we're going to take this. This will help you with your mana efficiency for your auras, as well as this wheel right here. Once you have this wheel and this wheel, you shouldn't have any issues putting those 3 auras in at a minimum. Other than that, you can also take this wheel here. There's a lot of damage over time here. And while you're leveling, and again, this is at level 65. This should be 65 plus your extra skill points. You should be around Act 7. You should be in your 50s is what it's stating. You can also come over here and start taking things like Avatar the Hunt. Very good. I actually missed this in my original video. The reason for it is something I'll suggest later on, but this is a very powerful wheel. You don't want to skip out on that. You can also come up here and get yourself The reflexes node, this will give you some suppression. You can start working on getting spell suppression. It's going to take you a little while to get up there. It's going to take a lot of specific gear, mainly evasion, strength based body, gloves, boots, and helm. Uh, Again, we'll cover that later. Mage Bane, excellent. Take Mage Bane if you can. Don't do it right away, but you will be taking Mage Bane later on because that is going to be a boon for our spell suppression. We can also get spell suppression down here. We're not too far from it. We can come over to this node here, take this wheel as well for spell suppression, and you can also come down here, get yourself some life masteries. Other than that, you're not going to do too much more with the way this build is set up and the way this wheel is set, or this page is set up, I should say. The drop down menus are down here: second threshold, first threshold, and mapping. So that's all set up for you as well. I'm trying to think here if there's anything else to really mention. Again, everything should be pretty much set the way you want. Another thing you can throw in here is maybe a stone golem. Those are really helpful. Throw one in here just for some life regen. You could also throw a vitality in here if you'd like. If you have the mana reservation available, you could do that. Yeah, this is about where you should be. All right, that is I think that's pretty good for the second threshold. Let's get to the conclusion, the mapping threshold, and go over the notes section for you. All right. So, mapping. This is where you want to be once you start getting into mapping. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm going to go ahead and mention now, is this right here. These are what you want by the end of the Merciless Lab. But this, Blood in the Eyes, is the single most important node in the Ascendancy for this build. This means things will be maimed, things will be blinded, things will take physical damage increased, and you get your 50% chance to cause bleeding, which will make up for a lot of the nodes around here. I also point out that there are a few sections here that you can start moving some of the points, bleed chance. You don't need these anymore. Some of these you will need, some of these you won't. Here you're going to automatically get some physical or some chance to bleed, but this is also a great wheel. These are all of the points that I've put in over here. A lot of life, little extra resistances, and some armor as well. So you get a lot of life and a little bit of damage over here on this side. Again, this is kind of what it looked like on the last section that I was showing you. You can now come down here, get yourself some more armor and evasion as well. That'll help out with the Mage Bane later on. And yeah, there you go. This really doesn't change too much. But one of the things that I also made sure of is that your items, there's nothing here that is stand out. As in, nothing here is 100% required and has stats on it that are unobtainable or difficult to obtain in a solo self-found environment. Also, a lot of this stuff is interchangeable. I wanted to make sure that the notes section, the configuration section, the custom modifiers, I used to have a bunch of all attributes to kind of supplement for all of the attributes you're going to need in this build. I decided instead I'll just put it on some of the gear. I removed all of the spell suppression. That's just something you're going to have to get, especially later on, because it's not obtainable to get tier 1 early on gear. Again, I'll go into the notes section here in a minute and kind of go over that and what are my suggestions for crafting some of that stuff. So all this stuff is relatively generic. Once you're able to get Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds currency, even the cheap stuff, these are the two modifiers you want to get on your helmet. You want to get reduced mana cost of your attacks, and you want to get mana reservation and efficiency of skills. That's going to help out with the mana cost of all of your items. Um, Other things to note are things like I have one unique. This unique is a really common unique. It's also farmable in Delve because it is a Delve unique originally. So it's not only a world drop, but you can also get it in certain chests in Delve. Uh, you can get it from a lot of the divination cards as well. So make sure you're paying attention and you're picking up all these rings. Of course, in solo self-found, you're probably picking that stuff up anyway early on, but Mark of Submission is a massive boon to this build. It really helps your damage. Other than that, -7 the total mana cost. Uh, this is one of those crapshoots. It could be a perfect, the stars align and the moons are in view. I don't know. I'm not philosophical, but you'll get that -7 eventually from doing June missions or having June in your maps and what have you. So you want to get that minus mana cost. It's going to really help you out because, again, holding snipe sometimes you may screw up and run out of mana. You got to really pay attention to the mana cost of stuff. I threw some dexterity on some of the gear. Dex is something you're going to have to make up for, but again, I just pay attention to the gear that you're getting. You're going to need a little bit of intelligence, not so much. The bigger problem will be your dex. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Other than that, some of the modifiers are definitely mid to upper tier. Just get the best that you can. You're not necessarily going to have a 366 PDPS bow right away, but this is a relatively low percent. Like this is a relatively low tier. Once you were able to start crafting and you can move towards getting this type of a bow, that's what you want to do. So again, just focus on high physical and getting that chance to bleed so that you can always have that up and you don't have to take extra points and you can get rid of the skill, which this is what your skill is going to eventually lead to. This is your snipe setup. Snipe, puncture, vicious projectile, swift affliction, brutality, deadly ailments. The split arrow, this is your clear skill, is going to be split arrow, cruelty, fork, vicious projectiles, volatility, and brutality. Both of these are your main skills, and this, again, will be your clear, and this will be your bossing or any difficult uniques. You also have a mana forged arrow setup. This has a maim in it as well. It kind of helps with making sure things have maim on it. You could switch this out if you'd like. Ensnaring arrow, frenzy, those are your two main ones. You want frenzy charges, especially for some of the uniques that I'm going to mention later on. Malevolence is your big dot, your big damage over time aura. Determination, War Banner, pretty generic. Again, War Banner from the get-go. Herald of Purity, very good. This is something you can use until you're able to supplement the mana or the mana reservation of all of your auras, and then you would want to replace this with Pride once you're able to do so. So you want to get an Enlighten or something like that in your setup. And again, that is very, very RNG. Good luck getting that. Otherwise, use Herald of Purity. I think it's totally fine. Vulnerability, you're going to throw that into your Mark of Submission once you get one. But there are plenty of sockets available in this build at this stage. You can always just throw it in and use it as a self-cast. And mainly you're going to focus on using it on rares that are difficult or unique or bosses. This here comes from your Ascendancy, so I'll show you that here. Again, the tree, one of the things I forgot to mention early on, but I'm mentioning it now. Blood in the Eyes, massive boon, biggest skill. Mainly this is like the main skill that Bleedbow Gladiator is even viable to begin with. So everything else is relatively good to great. Gratuitous violence, massive AoE clear. This is your big boom. It's got a very satisfying popping noise. Here's your outmatch and outclass. You want to get this as well. However, you're not going to get the endurance charge benefit unless we go back to the skills here. You decide to go with a call to arms and enduring cry setup. So these are kind of interchangeable. However, if you do have Outlast and Outcry, you want to take this. That way you can have your the benefit of having full endurance charges. But again, that's only if you have Enduring Cry on a rotation, or if you want to self cast it, you can do that as well. For me, I wasn't a fan of self casting that. So another thing is, this is what I suggest. It's not necessary. You could take Arena Challenger earlier if you'd like. This will automatically put you in Blood Stance. You will always be in Blood Stance, so you don't need to put Blood and Sand into the build. You can put Blood and Sand into the build early on. That is up to you. Again, do what you feel is the most comfortable. I'm just giving you what I did, and it was comfortable, and it worked. So yeah, that's that's really what I'm trying to get across is if it worked for me, then it can work for you. I don't know. But again, Arena Challenger, you're going to take that as your end game. This will be your last 2 points. So I'll go ahead and save it with that in it because this is the mapping. So you will be taking Arena Challenger. This is showing 74. So this is about Merciless Lab. We could put one more point in here and just kind of we'll do it that way. So now we're at 76, and you can do Uber Lab at this point. This is just kind of recommended. Once you have your Uber Lab, this will be your Ascendancy setup. Looks like a fidget spinner or something. And then this is the rest of the tree. Charisma is one of those things that you can eventually get rid of if you can make up for the mana reservation. One thing that you could consider at this point is maybe coming down here and getting a small cluster with mana reservation. That's totally up to your preferences and if it even works for your build at that point. So yeah, let me go ahead, switch over to the finale, which will be the note section that I want to kind of briefly go over, and then yeah, I'll open up to questions and just kind of sit here and wait for people to raise their hand or something. I don't know. All right, the final stretch. Now, I'm not going to obviously go over every single line here because there's no reason. A lot of this I've already covered. This is pretty much set up to be each individual threshold and kind of go over some stuff. This is the section I'm really going to focus on for this final portion of the video. This here is just kind of the things I kind of went over at the beginning. Some of the things that I kind of missed, but it's all covered here. So everything is always covered. Your first threshold, your second threshold kind of went into the same detail. I've already explained all that stuff. Mapping. I want to kind of go, actually, I want to go over the mapping a little bit. Start working on your spell suppression once you get to mapping. ROG is your friend. However, this is one of those things where it matters about your level. So you don't want to do any crafting with ROG until you are level 90. Once you are level 90, I'll even put this into the level 90. I'll make sure to put that in there because once you're at level 90, ROG can roll the highest item levels, which is 86. This gives you the opportunity to get 35% move speed on boots, and as well as a few other modifiers that only roll at higher tiers. Some of my suggestions for league mechanics. I would farm June right away. You really want that -7 on your ring and your amulet, or both rings if you don't have a mark of submission right away. Again, that'll take a while. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes it may take a bit. Expedition, again, that's how you're going to get your raw crafting. I've already actually put level 90 here, so I don't know why. Delve is also another thing. You can kind of get the Vuln ring from a physical node, or you can get the unique Mark of Submission from that as well. Again, Mark of Submission is a world drop. You can get it anyway, anywhere. Uh, so yeah. Harvest crafting, you definitely want to focus on some harvest crafting. That'll help you with some of the things that you're going to be working on later, like Delirium. You're going to want some large cluster jewels. 8 passive physical large. Those are the ones you're going to want to focus on. However, those are more end game. It's not necessarily for your mapping portion. So I kind of actually, you know what? I'm going to actually delete that because I don't want people to be confused about that. I've already gone over the ascendancy. Um, Again, arena challenge. You don't need blooded sand to work. It's already in blood stance. Another thing to work on. Start throwing your gem cutters at your snipe. Get that thing up to 7%, or I'm sorry, 7 stages. That's a pretty big boon of damage. Uh, Getting 7 stage snipes off on bosses, you'll definitely notice it. So here, this is the last thing I want to really go over, and that is the gear suggestions for Endgame. This is why I don't want to go over Endgame, nor do I want to go over the build that I ended up with, because I want to make this more simplified and just kind of give you some things, kind of carrot on a stick to work towards and try to find. This is also divided into 2 sections because I wanted to make sure you knew that some of the stuff will be easy, some of the stuff will be hard to maybe even impossible. So let's go ahead. Usurper's Penance Helm. Usurper's Penance Helm is a very low tier helm drop. Drops everywhere. It's a plate helm. Ezomite helmet, if I'm not mistaken. Um, you want to get one of these. These helms have a 4% multiplier for damage over time per frenzy charge. And because we're so close to a frenzy charge here, and there's another way to get a frenzy charge as well um, in the gear, uh, you can easily get 4 or 5 frenzy charges pretty quick, and it's just massive amounts of damage. I mean, 4 frenzy charges is 16% damage over time multiplier. So it's a very good helm. However, one thing to note is that the, not mastery, but the mastery that I have selected up here, your evasion mastery, this will be deactivated if you take this helm because it is a pure uh, strength helm or pure armor helm. So make sure you take note about that. Alessia's Delight. This one is a kind of, I was kind of debating if I wanted to put this into the simple or farmable stuff. It is a farmable item. Once you're able to do Maven in a relatively comfortable fashion, farm Maven. Put it on to your Atlas tree. Make sure you're doing Maven as often as possible. It'll also help you with one of the higher end things, which is the Awakened Gems. Um, but Alessia's Delight is a relatively common drop off of Maven. It's one of the 3 belts, which are the more common drops that she has. That is also a massive boon. It's another multiplier for damage over time. It converts your frenzy charges into, I can't remember what they're called, affliction charges, I believe. And also gives you +1 frenzy charges. That's where you can get another one in your build. So there's that. Mark of Submission, again, highly suggested. This is one of those things. It's just going to be a random luck drop, but it's a low tier item, world drop. It shouldn't take too long to see one of these eventually. So it goes great into the build. You can put your vulnerability in it and then work on more difficult things like getting a Warlord's ring or a Delve ring with Vuln on hit. Large cluster jewels, physical damage, 8 passives. Of course, that's what you want. You can do a 10 or a 9 passive. Again, that all has to depend on you, your luck, and what you get dropped, and where you want to allocate your points. Battle Hardened, Iron Breaker, Master the Fundamentals are the best prefixes. They're the only prefixes. Furious Assault and Force Multiplier are your suffixes. I put them in order of the best to worst. Granted, Master the Fundamentals is actually really good if you're making up for elemental resistances. Otherwise, these other two are fine. Battle Hardened and Ironbreaker I would consider to be better, and your Force Assault is better, although Force Multiplier is debatable. You want to go for the two prefixes and one of these suffixes, and then try to get whatever you can for your final suffix. Really good in this build. Chaos resist, of course, because it's gonna be difficult to get chaos resistance. You're not near any wheels or anything like that in the tree. You're gonna have to get it on gear. That's one way of getting it. And then int is also another really good thing, or dex. Medium cluster can work in this build. You want to get a damage over time medium cluster. You want to get it with student decay and wasting affliction on it. These cluster jewels, it's up to you how you craft them. I know there are people that use specific websites or specific things that say, oh, you know what, it's better to craft this item with, a certain currency, what have you. For me, I have terrible luck when it comes to crafting sometimes. So when I'm sitting there saying, oh, it's supposed to be 500 scour alks to get this, it's going to take me 1,000, 1,100 to even be lucky to get part of the roll I need. So I don't mind harvest crafting, that kind of stuff. I think harvest crafting on large cluster jewels isn't bad at all, especially because every one of these is a physical damage modifier. You can start getting yellow harvest crafting, and that'll give you the ability to roll physical modifiers. So that's one way of doing it. Awakened gems, again, I put this into the simple or farmable items. Again, you can farm Maven quite a lot. You can also take the node on the tree that allows you to get extra bosses in your maps, so you have better chances of getting awakened gems. These are your awakened gems. You got 4 of these technically because you have 2 of the same. These massive boons to your damage, obviously. So try to get these awakened gems. In my final version of my build, I actually didn't even have a single one of these, and I was still doing plenty of damage. So these are really good, something to always have in your mix, but it's not something you need to focus on. Here are some rare items that'll elevate the build even further. Unnatural Instinct. Again, in the tree, an Unnatural Instinct goes really well right here. What it allows you to do, it allows you to take all these points out. It gives you an extra 10%, or I'm sorry, an extra 10 int, and it'll give you these nodes as well when you have that in there. So you get a lot of physical damage over time. You even get some phasing on kill, which is also really helpful. The only thing you're going to lose out on is the Avatar of the Hunt, which you can, depending, anoint. But we're going to cover that here in a second. In the notes down here, again, Elegant Hubris. That's another, very unnecessary, but something that you could look forward to. Elegant Hubris isn't technically that difficult to farm. All you got to do is set up a Atlas tree and do Legion. Legion is really good in this build because you're shooting so many arrows and you're doing so many, you're bleeding out so many things and they're popping, and then the chests are popping, and you're able to pretty much clear full legions relatively early, actually. So eventually you can get yourself an Elegant Hubris. In the tree, if you get one of these, the best spot for it is about here. This will allow you to turn these 2 nodes. You're looking for the physical percentage damage, the physical damage percent, which is 80%, or the bleed. Gives you a hell of a lot of bleed damage and faster bleeds. So those are the ones you're going to look for. Again, very unlikely, very rare, but it's something to put into your bag of things to farm or things to look forward to. Storm Trout, again, that's another rare jewel. If you get one of these, you can move your tree around, try to get yourself ailment immune. Whether it be from jewels, you're also really close to these nodes right here, so you can also take this wheel and get some more ailment immunity. Eventually, you can get there and get yourself ailment immune too. Usurper's Helm with 90% RMR. And even if you get real lucky, you could try double corrupting those things and try to get a +2 aura as well. Toss your auras into your helm, and there you go. You're getting yourself some more RMR. It's helping your build. You're able to possibly move over to Pride, get tons more damage from that. Um, and again, it's another thing to look forward to or another thing to work on. Down here, I put down a little note about the anointments. You want, if you're going for RMR, you can go ahead and just get yourself your clarity. Charisma or clarity, either one, and put it on there. You can also get dirty techniques. That's your highest one, so I don't suggest trying to do this one unless you have a very well rolled amulet, because this is very expensive. Dirty techniques is not even on the tree here. It's actually, I don't know where it's at. Is it over here? Here? Where is it? Where is it? It might be one of the middle ones somewhere. Don't remember where it's at. But Dirty Techniques is a lot of percent damage over time, a lot of bleed damage. So that's your best one. However, you could, again, if you've got an unnatural instinct, maybe you could do Avatar of the Hunt. Or you can also take Farsight. That's another one that gives you some more damage over time. There's a couple of options. Again, you want to focus on damage over time. Here's another one here, Veteran Soldier. It's another good one. Gets some life, some more physical damage over time, multiplier. These are all functional. They're all able to be done. But again, you also have to focus on something like Blight to be able to get any of that stuff. So, other than that, this was a hell of a lot more concise. I think I covered everything possible. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comment section. Don't don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit me up on Twitch as well. I'm really looking forward to something coming on, coming along down the line here, because I'm kind of starved for some more content from PoE. We got Last Epoch with a new league coming out next week, so we got a little bit of work, got a little bit of things to do. Hope to see you there, and hopefully this all helped you out. And good luck with 3.25 league start. All right, take care.